Let us pray. Almighty God, where you have called us to govern this province, we ask your help to make decisions and laws that will be just and will promote the interests of the people. Almagtige God, ons bid dat u gedurende ons vergaderings ons die nodige wysigheid sal gee en ons motiewe suiwer sal hou en dat u ons sal help om ons tekortkominge te oorkom en al ons besluite aan u op te dra. Sikelela ilitswe letu na bantu balo, umiseli ukulunga kwipondo letu. Kosa sikeleli i Afrika, kina bantuana bayo, kokela in kokeli zayo, iniki ukola i Afrika. All this we beg in your holy name. Amen. You may be seated. Order. Before I call on the first speaker to address the House, I should like to give guidance to the House on the occasion of the first real debate in terms of the new Parliament. Excuse me. Members have undergone comprehensive orientation over the past few weeks on various aspects of parliamentary work. As far as the rules of debate and conduct in the House are concerned, I wish to remind members of the following. Racist remarks, either in speeches by way of interjection, are out of order and will not be tolerated. Although interjections are allowed, senseless interjections and running commentary do not add any value to the debate and will be stopped. The members speaking can count on the protection of the chair, who will intervene if and when deemed necessary. Drowning out of the member speaking will not be allowed. Allegations of unparliamentary language will be dealt with on their merits, taking into account the context in which they are made. Personal reflections of members will not be allowed. Unruly behaviour of whatever nature comprising the dignity and decorum of the House will be checked immediately. Members of the public sitting in the gallery may not disrupt proceedings and must adhere to the directions of the presiding officer. When speaking, members must stand in their places and address the chair. Finally, all cell phones are to be put on silent before the sitting begins. The Deputy Speaker and I do not intend stifling robust debate and unduly interfering from the chair in any way, but we expect members to conduct themselves within the parameters of the rules. Our electorate is entitled to a good but clean fight. Thank you. I recognize the Chief Whip.
Thank you, Speaker. I ask that the motion in my name on the order paper be moved. Thank you.
Are there any objections to the motion? No objections. Agreed to. The motion, the Chief Whip, that the House, point 1, expresses its sincere condolences to the next of kin. I just want to give the gist of the motion, just for the first. The motion is actually around the next of kin of Mr. Michael Coetzee, who died on Friday, the 13th of June. Mark, you go.
Completed.
Yes.
Okay. One that expresses its sincere condolences to the next of kin of Mr. Michael Coetzee, who died on Friday the 13th, 2014, following a long illness. Secondly, the notes that Mr. Coetzee was the Secretary of the Gauteng Provincial Legislature for a number of years, joined Parliament in 2002 as its Deputy Secretary before being appointed the Secretary of Parliament in November 2012. Thirdly, notes that he continued to serve the legislature sector even as he battled with the disease by playing a key role in the transition process from the 4th to the 5th National Parliament. And fourthly, Further notes that he was a faithful and humble public servant and a highly experienced and diligent administrator. I move.
Thank you. The Secretary will read the order of the day.
Debate on Premier's State of the Province address.
I've received a copy of the Premier's State of the Province address delivered in the House on Friday. The address is printed in the minutes of proceedings, and I now place it before the House for debate. I recognize the Honourable Member Fransman, Leader of the Opposition.
Madam Speaker, Honourable Premier, Honourable Members of the Legislature, comrades and friends, it is indeed good to be back. We have just celebrated 2 decades of democracy, a democracy built on the vision of the founding fathers of the African National Congress, and 102 years of struggle for social, political, and economic emancipation. A democracy crafted from the aspirations of the masses of our people as expressed in the Freedom Charter, a democracy grounded in the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa and the Bill of Rights. And as we begin the 5th democratic administration term, we do so with the full knowledge that as a country and a province, we have indeed traveled a long and hard road over the past 20 years, and we have indeed many good stories to tell. The state of the state in the Western Cape. 5 years of the DA rule in the Western Cape from 2009 to 2014, under the guise of an open, equal opportunity society, has seen the pursuit of what Lenin in his State and Revolution calls, and I quote, democracy for an insignificant minority, democracy for the rich. This myopia and willful compromise of the interest of the poor masses is evident everywhere. In the composition of the cabinet, representation in management, slow pace of the transformation agenda, protection of white privilege and class economic interest, as well as skewed service delivery patterns. Over the past 5 years, we have witnessed the most intensive war on the poor in every area, from housing to sanitation, from public transport to the plight of backyard dwellers, from the closing of schools to the suffering of farm workers, from the cultural and indigenous rights of the Khoisan to violence perpetrated against communities in drug-infested and crime-ridden areas. Madam Speaker, the question that must be addressed is what we've heard last week by the Premier, is the issues that will fundamentally transform society in the Western Cape. Can it address the real challenges that we are confronted with? Can it address the issues of inequality, poverty, and underdevelopment? What, therefore, must be done to address the challenges of our historical legacy, which is still the lived experience of millions? How do we build a society that we all can be proud of? In analysis of the Western Cape, there are 2 Western Capes, one for the poor, mainly white, and one for the poor, mainly black, and one for the rich, mainly white. In 2011, when the national census was done, 32% of our children lived below the poverty line, the majority, if not exclusively, being colored and African children. This is but one example of a stat that hides the deep wounds of poverty. On the other hand, between 2009 and 2012, the years for which complete GDP figures are available and in which this provincial government was in power, the Western Cape was ranked 3rd behind Gauteng and KZN in terms of GDP. If we were to look at the serious challenge of jobs for the same period, only 191,000 jobs were created in the DA-run Western Cape, of which half went to whites. This is therefore a direct result of what we have seen the open opportunity to society brings, what we can call the social Darwinism, as it were, the survival of the richest. The Western Cape will never be able to realize the vision and objective of a truly non-racial and non-sexist national democratic society unless we address the triple challenges of which I've mentioned earlier. This, therefore, is the ANC's belief that the following 8 areas should be looked at. Building an inclusive economy that is able to create jobs, a shared and inclusive economy, not an issue only of growth in the economy. Our economy needs to become more inclusive through very deliberate and practical interventions by the state. We must facilitate the direct participation of the majority of our people in the economic mainstream of this province and not treat them merely as commodities coming from the labour reserves of Atlantis, Mitchells Plain, Khayelitsha, Alsace River, and others. We must ensure that small business, the informal traders, and entrepreneurs, especially those that were disadvantaged, are able to gain entry into the market. This will include ensuring that our policy and legislature frameworks are biased in favour of the small businessman and not only the big business. And that, we believe, is something that we'll deeply have to reflect on if we speak about economic transformation within this particular province. We welcome the fact that the following programs initiated by the ANC government from 2004 to 2009 is still in progress. And here the Premier has mentioned them: the business processing outsourcing and call centre sector, the oil and gas sector, tourism, and the IDZ, and the special economic zones. These interventions, without exception, emanates from our policy provisions, and critical, the most challenging of it all, is how to use those interventions to ensure that transformation in the economy in the Western Cape can take place, because the ANC believes unless those issues are being addressed properly, we will have a problem in the future. The call for an inclusive economy in the Western Cape, therefore, is meaningless without radical economic transformation. And here we want to suggest issues relating to the patterns of ownership, relooking at public property lease agreements in the Western Cape administration, and how these perpetuate practices of the past. This provincial government needs to be deliberate in how property acquisitions and disposals are structured, examine land usage agreements and how these have been abused at the expense of the state and without furthering the interests of the poorest of the poor. We also make a special call on the provincial government to put aside your bias and initiate a partnership with the NYDA, the National Youth Development Agency, to ensure our youth are not denied opportunities. What do we do with 47 billion rand? How does that alter society through interventions of the provincial administration? The second area that we thought of focusing is the transformation of our rural areas through focused intervention based and rural and agrarian land reform. No matter how much lip service, Madam Premier, we pay to being open and equal, the reality is that we are haunted by our colonial and apartheid past, particularly in the rural context. The recent memories of our farm workers' strikes indicate how manifest the inequality is, and it's no use to throw that complaint in the context of others make it ungovernable. The challenge here is we must look at the imbalances between those in the rural farm worker community, the interest of the farmer vis-à-vis the interest of the farm worker, and we must strike a balance. And therefore, the following issues that the ANC will reflect on is the compliance in the Western Cape when it comes to minimum wage issues, serious penalties when illegal evictions are taking place, as well as the issues of assault. My colleague will go into much more detail. A third area of focus is to ensure decent living conditions and sustainable and integrated human settlements. What we've picked up, if you go back 20 years ago, if you go back 50 years ago, if you look at the spatial patterns in the Western Cape, Madam Premier, let's not deny the fact that the Group Areas Act, let's not deny the fact that the Urban Areas Act has created the conditions in which we are sitting today. That's the legacy. What we must do is therefore, through specialized interventions in urban planning, recreate the structural realities in our society. And therefore, in the face of growing urban migration and the arrival of more so-called, which the Premier called refugees into this province, and the continued lack of planning, slow pace of implementation, as well as the failure to meet delivery targets, we are being driven to the brink of a precipice, the consequences of which are way too horrendous to contemplate. This is compounded by an ever-growing waiting list, a backyard dweller problem that is already bursting at the seams, and what I will call a Rip van Winkle housing strategy to address the myriad of complex challenges in this area. It is not good enough for the Mayor of Cape Town to run to Blackheath when there is a problem of Luandle, to stand in front of the people of Blackheath and say, we will not allow people to come and reside here. But for 20 years, 30 years and more, nothing. We've seen no implementation over the last couple of years by the City of Cape Town for the backyarders in Blackheath. So our call is, let's not racialize the issue of housing delivery, because this is the pattern that we've seen. Year in and year out, the worst 48 informal settlements in the Western Cape are severely affected by floods in winter and fires in summer. Yet, besides the fact that there's no attempt to find a sustainable remedy in these informal settlements, during the heart of winter, the Premier makes no mention of our people in these areas in the SOPA. Improving and expanding education and training, here we want to say that we will support whatever strategic responsibilities there would be between national, provincial, and local government. A key strategic focus is education. And therefore, skills development, education is a way out to address issues relating to poverty and others. And therefore, it is not the appropriate way to close schools in the Western Cape. We should not close schools, because over the last couple of months, we've seen in the Western Cape, in Mitchell's Plain and in Khayelitsha, and in some rural areas, at least 2,000 learners not being in class. 3 months ago, the provincial government, the then MECs, argued that yes, they've now resolved 300 or 200 of those learners. Still, there's children out of class on the Cape Flats. So is the remedy to close schools? No, it's clearly not. And therefore, that's an area that we believe serious redress required. The issues about health and health care through the implementation of the National Health Insurance, we want to ask the Premier, we want to ask the provincial government, are you in complete support of the health insurance, of the National Health Insurance, because that is a strategic focus of the national government, it is a strategic focus of the ruling party, it is a strategic focus of the opposition within the Western Cape. Our healthcare system must be one, therefore, that is premised upon the principles of preventative healthcare for the poor. It cannot be that we are saying that the reason why there's health problems and healthcare problems in the Western Cape is because of all these people coming from the Eastern Cape. That would be a wrong approach. It's a wrong message. It makes people unwelcome within this part of our country. And therefore, the support for the NDP, we've heard it. However, the support cannot be a cherry-picking one. You must embrace the entire plan, including the NHI, and we are looking forward to your commencing the rollout of this policy. The seventh point that we thought of highlighting is our fight against crime and corruption. This approach in fighting crime and corruption must be a holistic one that requires synergy, synchrony, and functional coherence between government departments, social and security clusters, spheres of government, together in partnership with community. We cannot continue with the blame and complain. We cannot have a situation where there's a breakdown of trust between national government and provincial government, and a breakdown of trust with the community structures, because crime is all of our business, and what we require is therefore a collective, integrated, and coherent effort in addressing these things. Our approach to resolving crime and building safer communities is to focus not only on the effects, but also on the causes, the socio-economic realities of our community. The eighth point, united nation and promoting social cohesion. We need to find ways where our different African, colored, Indian, and white communities can converge and get to know each other. This needs to happen through our schooling system, integrated and sustainable human settlements, sports festivals, music and arts festivals, heritage celebrations that are inviting and comfortable to all our diverse communities and cultures. We cannot have a leadership that through their words and actions alienate large sections of our communities by referring to them as refugees, not allowing the Cape Malay choirs and the Klopse to march, and our Khoisan community to display their heritage. And here, important issue, we know that the first war of resistance in South Africa actually took place in the Western Cape. It comes from here. The descendants of the Khoi and the San, the colored community. We've seen the ANC has introduced particular policies in terms of the pre-1913 Land Act and the question around land claims. And what we require is an aggressive response by the provincial government for those individuals and those communities that are part of that original Khoisan community in order for us to address that hard reality. And here Oudemolen comes to mind. Here other sites in the Western Cape come to mind. Here heritage sites come to mind. And therefore we cannot allow that those sites to be alienated. Madam Speaker and Madam Premier, allow me to address the claim that the DA Opportunity Society is premised on the cornerstone of our Constitution and its founding principles. Nothing can be further from the truth. Let me remind this House and our people of the Western Cape what the Constitution of the Republic in its preamble says, and I quote, "We the people of South Africa recognize the injustice of our past. Even before we come to open society, we recognize the injustice of our past, and we have to therefore reflect and create strategic interventions." What we've heard is somehow an input that speaks about, let's forget about that past. Let's not say the harsh realities that was created by apartheid. We are all equal, we are all open, and therefore we must all go and compete outside. It's not possible. We require a transformation agenda through the state intervention. And therefore the Premier has a moral responsibility to put in place clear policies, programs, and interventions to address that particular legacy. In fact, it is Trevor Noah that possibly put it the best. Trevor Noah says, here we've got pre-94. What happens pre-94? There is a harshness and an assault on people. But in the other part of society, there is an affirmation. Come 94, we are all so-called equal, and therefore we are all having the same opportunities. And it is then the fittest, the bravest that survive. It is wrong. It's a wrong approach. It's in fact going to create serious imbalances in the future in the Western Cape. Instead, therefore, the body of evidence of the Open Opportunity Society reveals a resistance to the preamble of our Constitution, which requires the government to, let me quote, "yield, Premier, the divisions of the past and establish a society based on democratic values, social justice, and fundamental human rights." We want to remind this House, therefore, that the very essence of our Constitution is one of transformation. And therefore, the provincial government is found wanting in a province where the issue of employment equity performance is the worst in the country, and where whites still constitute more than 70% of senior management, both in the public and in the private sector. We call on Madam Premier to clarify how our government intends to address this very issue of transformation and redress in the workplace. You may recall, Madam Speaker, how the Honourable Premier tweeted on June the 13th last year that, and I quote, "No one has to use a bucket in this province. There is no need for buckets." Only to be contradicted by the mayor when she clarified there were about 600 households that lacked access to decent sanitation. However, even the mayor's figures were also contradicted by the city of Cape Town. That very figure was contradicted by the city's own human settlement report that confirmed that no less than 80,000 households had no access to proper sanitation. This cause was not being assisted by the DA's denialism. Why are we denying issues of social justice, issues of human rights? Why are we not addressing that head-on through a proper interventionist? Or will the open society approach actually address this? Subsequent to that damning evidence, the human rights report finding on sanitation was even more telling, as it blatantly stated, and I quote, "The situation in the Western Cape, as you can see for yourself, is devastating both in terms of the indignity and the serious health implications in the unservicing of the toilets and the fact that people have to empty these buckets themselves. Quote close. The Premier must respond. If you've got the Constitution, she swears allegiance to the Constitution, she speaks about the open society, not the social justice part of the Constitution, not the historical legacies of it. What is the premise of this provincial government? The Premier has not explained what this province will do to address all the current challenges of governance and service delivery. If you reflect on the sanitation, we've got a big crisis on sanitation, even to such an extent that the President pronounces a minister dealing with sanitation. The Premier is silent on this matter. Is it because the people affected by sanitation problems is largely poor, Black, African, and colored? Is there something around that that speaks about the fundamentals of what I would call the politics of deception, a hypocrisy, a building of a government on a PR exercise and not to address the fundamentals? Local government is therefore the coalface of our service delivery, and political instability breeds governance instability. And therefore, we call on the Premier to ensure that there is effective local government performance auditing on treatment of poorest of the poor and vulnerable. And let's introduce the debate. Is audit itself speaking about performance? If one has a clean audit, does it by implication speaks about how you address the poorest of the poor? How do you address the poor communities? Or is it more a financial process? And hence, the issue of compliance, the issue of clean governance must be coupled with the question about performance and the transformation of our society. In conclusion, Madam Speaker, we have come a long way over the past 20 years. The key challenge we therefore face in the Western Cape over the next 5 years is how we address the deracialization of our provincial economy. Is the Premier satisfied that the economy in the Western Cape still reflects the patterns of racial discrimination of the history? Is the DA seeing that as acceptable norm? Is it fine that we are seeing when economic growth happens, as long as tourism boosts take place, because we agree with that, but we must not talk about tourism in the townships. We must not talk about tourism in the rural communities. We must not talk about the supply line of those issues. We therefore continue to make gains, but our society is far more deracialized in the Western Cape. And the imperatives of restorative justice remains as relevant today as it was at the dawn of a democracy. So the question in front of us, the vision of a Western Cape 10 years, 20 years from today, if we align it to the 2030 objectives, will it be a Western Cape that, as we've seen the last 5 years, has reinforced old racialized patterns of development, or will it be a Western Cape that actually integrate in a serious approach the question around human settlements? This task, to paraphrase the words of Martin Luther King from his speech, "I have a dream," shall remain a priority as long as we remain, and I quote, "an island of prosperity in the midst of a vast ocean of poverty." An island of prosperity in Constantia, an island of prosperity in Rondebosch, an island of prosperity in Blauberg, against a sea of poverty in Khayelitsha, a sea of poverty in the rural areas, a sea of poverty in Mitchell's Plain. And unless the intervention is happening, what we will see is that island of prosperity will be swollen by the sea of poverty. I thank you.
Thank you. I recognize the Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I rise in support of the State of the Province address. Honourable Speaker, we must remember that the ANC has lost the election, and therefore the ideas of Lenin that was quoted in this House was also rejected on the 7th of May in the Western Cape. Honourable Speaker, I am rising because last Friday the Honourable Premier turned hope into action. I am rising because he skillfully articulated and translated the 2014 electoral mandate of the citizens of the Western Cape into a program of action. She delivered an executive report to the citizens of the Western Cape. In addition, Honourable Speaker, the Premier gave a clear message to all the citizens that her government is both committed and ready to implement the National Development Plan. Honourable Speaker, no promises were made, only commitments were made in the State of the Province address. It is commitments because everything the Premier announced last Friday in this House has a budget, it has a time frame, has a committed partner, and has clear targets. Honourable Speaker, one of the requirements of the National Development Plan is to have a capable state. Under the leadership of Premier Alan Zille, she has put the governance architecture in place to ensure that we have a capable state in the Western Cape. Firstly, she translated the electoral mandate into a government-wide program of action. Secondly, she modernized the public service through the appointment of people who are fit for purpose. Thirdly, she identified and implemented the financial governance model to ensure greater accountability and responsibility for programs, budgets, and service delivery targets. Lastly, Honourable Speaker, Honourable Premier Zille has also put in place an effective monitoring and evaluation system to put it in place to track the performance of the different service delivery targets through the provincial dashboard system. Key concepts, Honourable Speaker, to the open opportunity society, which has also found its way into the National Development Plan, are that we must pursue growth and prosperity as the best way to fight poverty and unemployment. Honourable Speaker, also a commitment that all individuals and communities must be involved in their own development, and requiring the state to extend opportunities to all through excellent education and essential services, but also through creating the right conditions for investment and job creation. Also, the National Development Plan is quite clear that we need active citizenry. We need to develop citizens' own capabilities to pursue their lives they value. Honourable Speaker, the provincial strategic objectives translate the open opportunity society for all into practical policies, programs and projects. Honourable Speaker, the 2014 medium-term budget policy statement reaffirms the province's commitment to giving effect to the policy priorities of the National Development Plan. The aims of the Western Cape medium-term budget policy statement is to promote economic growth, to increase employment and decrease unemployment, to reduce poverty, crime and social ills, and to improve the quality of education and health. My colleagues will elaborate on the detail. Honourable Speaker, while the Western Cape government remains committed to grow the economy and create job opportunities, as envisaged in the National Development Plan via its many programs, the Western Cape will also sharpen its commitment to utilise its available resources more efficiently, as well as to rein in the public expenditure to affordable and sustainable levels. Honourable Speaker, the Office of the President has developed an assessment tool known as the Management of Performance and Assessment Tool, or MPAT, and measured all provincial government departments and the national government departments using 4 criteria. 1, good governance. 2, financial management. 3, strategic management. And 4thly, human resource management. Honourable Speaker, each provincial government gets an allocation based on the needs of the provinces, taking into account historical imbalances of the past, and gets assessed accordingly. Honourable Speaker, it is common knowledge that the Office of the President has rated the government led by Premier Alan Zille as the best run provincial government in South Africa. Honourable Speaker, the official opposition often rejects this particular claim.
Order.
Honourable Speaker, the official opposition often rejects this notion that the Western Cape is the best run province because they claim that this does not translate into improved services for the poor. Well, Honourable Speaker, let us examine how being the best-run province translates into enhancement of services to the poor. Again, Honourable Speaker, the official results of Census 2011 gives us that answer. The census confirmed that the Western Cape is the #1 province in South Africa in the provision of basic services. It confirmed that the Western Cape is the #1 province in electricity provision, #1 in water provision, #1 in sanitation, and #1 in refuge collection. Honourable Speaker, let us make this matter quite clear. The Western Cape is the best-run province because we are a capable government, and we are certainly geared towards delivering on the action demanded by the National Development Plan and so clearly outlined by the Premier last week. Honourable Speaker, the President not only once rated the Western Cape as the best-run provincial government, but twice. Honourable Speaker, the Premier has also highlighted her commitment to partnerships with citizens, civil society, and other government agencies. Partnerships that are effective, Richard, yield results. Examples of these are small entrepreneurs such as the Department of Coffee in Khayelitsha, and I've been there together with Minister Windy, Virgin Active, our partner in sport in the MOD program, private companies partnering with us on the 110% Green Initiative, businesses working with us on the Workplace Skills Plan, the Western Cape Government's partnership with our 4 universities, and our partnership with China and Shandong, which led to the establishment of the Hisense factory in Atlantis. Honourable Speaker, Premier Zille actively pursues partnerships, and we have just witnessed a latest partnership in the space of broadband and the violence protection through urban upgrade, commonly known as the VPUU project. These partnerships, Honourable Speaker, create public value and change the quality of life of citizens in the Western Cape. Honourable Speaker, the partnership with the European Union, which will also turn Waldorfkloof into an effective youth leadership centre and is mostly welcome in the Cape Highlands area. Premier Zille has opened the door for partnerships. Institutions partner with government when they see good governance in action. Good governance attracts investments through partnerships. Premier Zille spent a lot of time last week on a speech on partnerships because this government believes in the slogan, better together. Honourable Speaker, the Premier was frank in her assessment and her desire to create a better partnership with the national government agencies and public entities. She will pursue this in the interest of all the citizens of the Western Cape. And as he put it, we want partnerships to work because we want South Africa to work. Honourable Speaker, the Premier and her government is on a mission to create jobs and to create conditions for job creation. The Cape Town International Convention Centre is one of the few profit-making conference centres in the world. It already generates a significant contribution towards the Western Cape GDP. Once it has doubled in size, it is likely to annually generate 5.1 billion rand to the regional economy of the Western Cape, and it will create a further 8,000 jobs. The government has earmarked 161 million rand towards the expansion of the Cape Town International Convention Centre over the next 2 years. Growing the economy and creating jobs is the #1 strategic objective of this government. Honourable Speaker, just yesterday, I met with representatives of the 4 universities in our region and discussed the contribution of conferences to our local economy. I was informed that the Cape Town International Convention Centre has identified South African academics serving on international academic boards with a view of getting them to actively market the Western Cape as a successful conference destination. As a value add, the Cape Town International Conference Centre assists these academics with the bidding process. Growing the economy, creating jobs, and partnerships require that we have functional partnerships. Honourable Speaker, to finance the plans the Premier announced on Friday, an amount of 103.8 billion rand will be spent over the next 3 years to deliver services to the Western Cape communities. Honourable Speaker, the Premier has committed the Western Cape government also to spend 109.2 billion in the in the metropolitan area of Cape Town, which forms 75% of the economy and 64% of the population. This government, in the programs that the Premier announced last week, 18.2 billion rand will be spent in the Cape Winelands, 11.6 billion will be spent in the Eden District, the fastest growing region in our province. 7 billion rand will be spent in the West Coast District, 4.6 billion in the Overberg region, and 1.8 billion in the Central Karoo. Honourable Speaker, the Premier has, through a regional socio-economic program, committed the Western Cape to the rural development. She has also successfully lobbied municipalities to commit to the National Development Plan. Through her Premier's Coordinating Forum, she has promoted the concept of integrated cooperative governance. In practice, Honourable Speaker, the Premier has called on all the mayors to ensure that there is an alignment between the IDP, the provincial strategic objectives, and the National Development Plan. You can clearly see, Honourable Speaker, the Premier means business. She's on a hurry to implement the National Development Plan, where else in the country there's ideological differences to implement the National Development Plan. There's unity of purpose in this Cabinet, Honourable Speaker, to implement the National Development Plan, and you cannot say the same of the ANC in the National Parliament. Honourable Speaker, through the M-Grow and the C-Grow processes, we are able to ensure that plans are aligned to budgets and service delivery targets. Honourable Speaker, last Friday, the Premier explicitly connected the vision and action in an outcome-based governance approach. Honourable Speaker, in conclusion, the State of the Province Address is an executive summary of our resolution to create an educating Cape, an enterprising Cape, a green Cape, a connecting Cape, a living Cape, and a leading Cape in the interest of all the citizens of the Western Cape. Lastly, Honourable Speaker, the SOPA is the first phase in the journey from a good story to a great story. And the Office of the President has already acknowledged that we are a good story. And we are now busy with producing a great story. Watch it.
Thank you. I now recognise the Minister for Economic Opportunities.
Thank you very much, Speaker. It's a great honour to rise in this debate. I headed my speech, the ANC is all talk and no action. But I must say, after the Honourable Leader of the Opposition speech, I had to change that to say all talk with no basis. And I will show why I say that. But I think to start off, I must first of all say, as this is the first opportunity for me to speak post this new government and the elections, to say thank you very much to the voters for the overwhelming support in putting this government back into power. But also to say thank you to the Premier for giving me this challenge and this opportunity, of which I do say to this House and the people of this province that I will push and do whatever is necessary to take this province to new heights. But where do we find ourselves at the moment in the economy? Where do we find ourselves? And this sort of comes to the basis of the Honourable Opposition speech. What did he use as the concrete evidence in making the statements that he made here today? So the 79.1% employment rate in this province, just short of 80% employment rate, where we know at a national level we're seeing greater and greater unemployment rates, and more scarily, greater and greater a divide between those looking for work and those who have given up looking for work. We also will commit to those 546,000 people in this province who don't have a job. Those people are why I get up in the morning, to make a difference for those people. We know that this province has got the best Gini coefficient in the country. We know that this province's Gini coefficient, if you monitor it over the last while, has been narrowing. So it is a better story than any other story in South Africa. And this province, by the way, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, is also part of South Africa. And we can use this province as a good example because it's got a very good story to tell. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition made mention of the GDP growth rate, and he said we are number 3 in South Africa. He's correct, we're 14.7% of the national GDP. But watch this number grow, and that's going to be my challenge. I'm saying where we are, in 5 years' time, I want to be at a greater percentage of the overall GDP in South Africa. I also want to make sure that even with that 14.7% that the leader of the opposition understands, that at the last quarter jobs numbers, which he spoke about jobs numbers, but let's look at the number one in the GDP by province, which is Gauteng. And in the last quarter, Gauteng created 62,000 jobs. This province, this region, at number 3, guess what they created? How many jobs? 146,000 jobs. Way in excess, the number 3, beating Gauteng hands down. So again, where's the basis of what the Honourable Opposition is using for his speeches? We need talk to action. And this is the province where the action actually takes place. Under the ANC nationally, we are seeing the economy going down and down. We're just one rating short of gash, of rubbish. The rating agencies rating our country just one rating short of a junk bond status. I mean, this is what this ANC government is taking us to in this country. And the National Development Plan, which, it was interesting, I heard the Honourable Leader of Opposition saying, the National Development Plan, in this space or this province, we cherry pick. What we do in this province is we actually act as the pilot province for many of these NDP projects, and you will see how those projects are delivered, and we buy into that. What happens at a national level, they don't cherry pick, they actually sabotage the National Development Plan. Perhaps a last point on this, maybe one or two last points on the Leader of the Opposition. The GEMS report, I'd ask him to read it. Again, a basis before you make a speech in this House. Use the GEMS report, rate 74 countries around the world on entrepreneurship, and go and have a look at what they say about this region, and it does rate us to Gauteng, because we put extra money into this program, so we actually know what our benchmarks are. And if you're an SMME in this province, you have a much better likelihood of growing your business, of getting your business started, and of creating a profit and sustaining. Also going to have a look at how much farm workers are paid in this province as according to other provinces, and you will see our farm workers are the highest paid in this province according to South Africa. And perhaps, Madam Speaker, while talking about payment, I know that some other members of the ANC are going to speak today, and maybe they could answer the question because the Honourable Leader of the Opposition can't. But has the ANC actually paid the CTICC yet? Because 4 years without paying the CTICC is a business in this province that needs to employ people. Those poor people that the Honourable Leader of the Opposition was talking about, that business wants to employ more people. If we don't pay our accounts, we can't do that. And by the way, it's also about Golden Arrow. Have you paid them? And have you paid those hotels in the city that have been waiting for 4 years for their money? Madam Speaker, let's also talk about the risks. The massive risks to the economy. Electricity supply. We want to grow our economy. Electricity supply, a major problem. I'll talk just now about a solution that we can bring to that in the Western Cape. Policy uncertainty. I spoke about the Leader of Opposition spoke about cherry picking. It's actually about sabotaging the National Development Plan, and we cannot have that kind of policy uncertainty. I'll talk a bit about that. Water and climate change, unemployment, redress. Exactly. Redress is a risk, and we need to fix that, and we commit to that redress. Land reform. I will commit under my new portfolio that we will take land reform head on. Today, we've already said as the Democratic Alliance that we will become a land reform pilot project to deliver on what the National Development Plan says, not what this new kind of different statement, give 50% of your farm away from the National Minister on land reform, which is totally in contradiction to what the NDP says. Again, sabotage of the plan. It's about all talk and no action. Let's look at tourism. All talk and no action.
Order, member.
This is the province where we win all of the awards. The best destination, the bucket list globally. But what does this side of the House do where they're in government? They cut our direct flights. They cut that pipeline in. Not only London to Cape Town, now the Argentinian flight, and so they carry on because of bad management and bad government. When they do that, the private sector just takes up that space. Last month, British Airways started putting 2 extra flights into this city in winter. Why? Because we decided to cut off our own nose to spite our face. But now have a look at how we're sabotaging ourselves again. Look at the latest visa requirements. Just have a look at that. Last night, I met some huge investors. They just spent 2 billion rand on buying the Protea Hotel Group. Speak to the CFO who battled to get here. What kind of message is that? Because visa requirements. What kind of message is that? If you are living in India or China, which is the fastest growing tourism market into our space, into our province at the moment, and into our country, what the president talks about creating jobs, they're going to go to biometric systems where anybody who wants to travel here from China has got to get on a plane, fly to Beijing, get their fingerprints taken so that they can apply for a visa to fly home and wait to see if they can get a visa before they come. You kill the market. While we are doing this, our competitors, being our neighboring countries like Namibia, are saying, get visa on entry. Just get on the plane, get here, we'll give you a visa when you get here. The rest of the world is making it easier for China to visit them. There are going to be more than 100 million high net worth individuals in China within the next year or two. They want to travel the world. We are saying to them, don't come here. So every single thing that happens, you've got the ANC busy sabotaging the economy. Let's have a look at broadband. Every single SOPA, I went and had a look at every single SOPA that the president made since 2009 talks about lowering the costs of telecommunications and getting access across the whole country of broadband. No, just talk, no action. In this province, the budget is in place, the 1.3 billion. Pilot projects already happening. They're already out there rolling out. If I have time, I'll talk about the school stuff that's happening and what a difference it's going to make in education. Incubators already happening. The next incubator, Honourable Francois, is opening in Khayelitsha. We've already launched the ICANN Centre in Elsie's River. 10% of our population that we connect will equal to be 1.3% GDP growth. That's why we're doing it, for redress and making the difference for the people of this province. The IDZ, all talk and no action, lots of noise at the launch of the IDZ, and the Honourable Francois was there making most of the noise. But of course, we let the talk and the noise go. As soon as that was over, we patched all the uncertainty, and as I stand here today, there are 18 companies that have now signed MOUs with us to invest in. National was a partner in it. National paid half of the study. The study was done by Wescrow. I was involved in the whole process. Don't come here with this nonsense. But perhaps while we're talking about the IDZ and gas, I mentioned a massive risk, which was electricity. I have already handed over to the Minister of Finance, to the Minister of Energy. I've handed over a gas to electricity plan. It's been devised in this province. We can land gas to electricity at less than 1 rand a kilowatt hour. Medupi and Kusile, when eventually they come online, if they come online, another ANC project that we talk about a hang of a lot, it hasn't been connected yet, they probably will come online at 1.20 rand a kilowatt hour. But let's see if they take up that challenge. We believe that we can put that power very quickly into the grid system in this province, which will balance green energy, balance the solar and the wind. But there's a challenge for the Leader of the Opposition to, on behalf of this province, take up, let's go and get gas to energy in this province. I will get a full document to your office. And then lastly, Madam Speaker, land reform. Land reform again, I said, here we go. The President has just announced 1 million jobs in agriculture. And then Minister Nkwinti says, let's kill the economy and let's get all the agricultural businesses to actually lay off people, by making another policy statement that is a direct contradiction to what is stated in the National Development Plan. Again, sabotage, contradiction, just a lot of talk and no action. The NDP, we have said today we will take on land reform, and the NDP, as the land reform project as outlined in the NDP, will become a pilot project. There's only one right in the very north of this country. Let us be a pilot project. As we speak, my office is busy setting up the meeting to go and meet with the National Minister so that we can actually get that going. We'll be the pilot project. But again, let's also have a look at our other projects, the equity share schemes. Of the 85 equity share schemes, 81 successful, and go and visit those. You in the oversight space, go and visit those. The interesting thing is, those farms owned by those farm workers are busy buying more farms. They're busy growing their businesses. It is a success story. You've got to go and have a look at it. It is making the difference. And then perhaps also in line with what the honourable opposition is saying around this government lot looking at redress, where we're investing our money, go and have a look. And your job is oversight. Go and see how many businesses
Honourable
are started
Member, your
in this
time
province.
has expired.
Go and see where the money is invested, because it is making a difference for redress and going to change the economy over the next 5 years. Thank you, Speaker.